Hey again, everybody, and welcome to the Experience Maker Show. This is Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker and coach. So happy to have you here on a special Friday edition of the show. Really excited for today's guest because she is a dear friend of mine. I remember that we met at an event, I don't know, it's got to be 5, 6, 7 years ago at this point, and just hit it off and have stayed connected since then. She's doing terrific work in the customer experience field and also has such a fascinating background that we'll get into. So I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Grace McCandless. She is the Vice President of Customer Engagement and Brand Advocacy for Clearlink. Sarah, how are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you, even just virtually. I haven't seen you in person for far too long. So thanks for having me on.
It has been way too long, and I look forward to it again. We definitely are owed some time together. So awesome to see you. For folks that don't know you, you want to just do a little introduction of you and Clearlink?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, my current role is Vice President of Customer Engagement and Brand Advocacy, and Clearlink is actually part of the Sykes family. I've been with the Sykes organization for almost 6 years now, which is really hard to believe. And Sykes is a global organization that partners with brands all over the world to create intelligent customer experiences at every stage of the journey. The Clearlink piece, that acquisition happened about 5 years ago. Clearlink's real expertise is in that front end of the journey. So that kind of awareness acquisition stage. And it's part of the strategic decisions that Sykes has made over the last 5 to 10 years to be that kind of full service partner.
Yeah, I really like that. Let's dive right into that because, as you know, I love to sit at the intersection of customer experience and marketing. And I often think that, CX starts usually the first time we see a piece of marketing from a company. It's like the first exposure that we have. So if you're talking about the top of the funnel in terms of customer experience, walk me through how that works and what are clients using Clearlink for?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's kind of your first impression, right? Like, do I know who you are and do I want to hang out with you, really? I mean, it's kind of like a relationship you would have with a person, right? So that first meeting, and where Clearlink's expertise really comes in is sort of that first impression. So what do most customers do when they're looking for something? They get online and they search for it, right? So then they end up somewhere, usually on a website, and start to do research and start to make that decision. Or you might start to do your research by looking at social conversations. What are people saying about a brand or a product that you might be considering? So that's really where Clearlink's expertise is in that search to sales side of things and that acquisition side. And, Sykes as an organization was smart to start thinking about this again, a good 5 to 10 years ago. And Sykes historically has been about that support stage of the journey, which is, of course, critical. I mean, I think consumers today, you can make a mistake. We are human beings behind these companies, but it's how you show up when the mistake is made, right? So it's really about that whole journey. And Chuck Sykes, who's our CEO now, really had that foresight to think about that and find a partner like Clearlink who's so good in this space and really marry the two together to be, again, about marketing, sales, and service.
Yeah, really smart. I know that Sykes has been in the business for a long time on the service side, and that obviously comes a lot later in the journey. So I think it's really smart to connect from a client perspective, and then obviously from their customer perspective early on. So what are you seeing in terms of, are there any trends that you can share, anything around how prospects are searching or looking today that maybe has changed either with the pandemic or just changed over the years? I know certainly it does seem like almost everything starts with a Google search, but then we start getting into ratings and reviews and social media and all these places. Any sense for sort of the journey, if you will, of that early phase where we're just educating ourselves and trying to decide if we want to do business with a company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a couple things that jump to mind, and I think that 2020 had an impact on this as well. So one thing is that I think we, being stuck at home, we are online even more so than ever. And we are savvy researchers online. You can find out just about anything. So I would say Something that's continued to grow is the impact of consumer reviews, both positive and negative. And as an organization, we have experience in that space too, in terms of having teams that go in to address those negative reviews and try to course correct things. But where we're seeing the opportunity is also saying our thank yous for those positive reviews, that people take the time to give you a compliment. You shouldn't just turn heel and walk out of the room and ignore it. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing too is that where we're looking for those insights has grown. So part of that is the consumer review sites. We're looking for media coverage on a particular brand or product. We are looking on social, and we're looking at how people are talking about things, and not just on like Twitter and Facebook. We're looking at trends and how people are talking about products and brands on Instagram and TikTok and pretty much everywhere. So it's really about understanding, as a brand, what does your customer think about you in all of these places? Not just what you think your customer thinks about you, but really doing that research and that social intelligence to understand and get a full picture.
And I love that. A couple things you said I want to highlight. First of all, responding to positive comments. I am shocked still at how few companies do this. And it not only is it a great opportunity, but when we stop to think about that people have taken time out of their day and used up their own social capital to say something nice about us in public, I think the least we can do is thank them back, right? Or like the tweet or whatever it is. And it is, I think the reason for this is that, that social media customer service tends to lie in the customer service area. And customer service folks, frankly, aren't used to talking to people that are happy with us. That doesn't happen on the phone or on chat, right? Almost always the agents are talking to people that are having a problem. And so now you get onto social, and it's this channel where people can also sing your praises. And I think that's awesome, but it's also something to leverage. The other thing I wanted to point out, I thought that was great that you were saying, is that our customers can be anywhere and everywhere, and understanding where they are and what they're saying about us, because they're not always saying it to us. They're not always using our feedback channels. They're talking about us in the wild, in their own spaces, and we have to know that. I think that's terrific. I want to get to a couple of people who are watching and commenting. Chris Strub, thank you as always for being here, Chris. Responsiveness, a major plank of Wiser. Yes, that is my methodology. Witty, immersive, shareable, extraordinary, and responsive. And those are how we get positive customer experiences. And then the responsive part, of course, is what we do when we get them. And how about BK in the house? Brian Kramer, how do you make personalization more efficient and definitely not creepy? So you're finding all this interesting stuff, Sarah Grace, and then how do we use it but not overuse it?
That is a great question. I'm going to give you a personal example of that as well. But I can tell you, the teams that we have, particularly on social, who are really paying attention to those moments of awareness, acquisition, and advocacy, there's a lot of strategy and discussion that goes behind that. And first and foremost, before we personalize it, we have to make sure we understand our brand partner, what their voice and tone is, and what we're dialing up or down in a given situation. Because as a brand, you probably have a couple attributes that you lean into. You're not going to lean into all 2 or 3 all the time. It really begs understanding the context of the scenario. You don't want to be that person at a cocktail party who butts into the conversation and you think you have something to contribute, and then it's like awkward silence after that, right? So a great personal example I can give you is one of my favorite stories to tell about an international flight that I had that was co-run by Delta and KLM. And this was a scenario, this was several years ago. So I'm a huge dog person, big dog mom. My current dog is Gilda Radner. My previous dog was Nancy Drew. And at the time I had Nancy Drew. And I actually tweeted out, I had a great flight, no problem, and gave them kudos, as we were talking about, right? Give them praise. And they both chimed in. And Delta did a good job. Delta said, thanks for the feedback. We hope you have a good flight. And KLM replied to me and they said, we bet you're excited to get home and see Nancy Drew. Now, how did they know that? They took 2 seconds to look at my Twitter profile, which at the time said, Dog Mom to Nancy Drew. And they personalized it. It didn't take a lot of time. It just took some thought and some strategy. And I have told the story 24 times because it's just so memorable to me. And it made me say, Yeah, that's exactly right. I hadn't taken, it was an international flight. She didn't come with me to Italy. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's the difference. And it's just really understanding your customer, looking at that conversation history and thinking about what you can say that's going to get them to say, yeah, I do feel that way, or feel like a kindred spirit with you versus that kind of creepy factor.
Yeah, and especially if we're looking at conversations where we're not tagged, that's where the
Right.
creepiness factor potentially comes in. But certainly, if somebody's having a problem and they mention your brand and you're not tagged, I think coming in and saying, "Hey, sorry to hear that this happened. What can we do?" I think would be welcomed. I love the Nancy Drew story because one of the brands that I talk about a lot, that by far of all the brands I talk about, this is the one that people have the best reaction to, is Chewy. And everybody has a Chewy story. And one of the ones that I like to tell has to do with a customer service email in which Chewy mentions the name of the pet. Now, Chewy is a pet supplies company, so you may expect them to know your pet's name, although I wouldn't say that it is necessarily required. But what got me thinking was, why don't more companies know my pet's name? And how could they possibly find that out? Especially now, if we're talking in the B2B space, when we're having so many conversations like this on Zoom, maybe Nancy Drew's come into the picture a couple of times. And and I've now seen Nancy Drew. Sorry, Nancy Drew's not around anymore. It's Gilda
He's
Radner.
always here. He's always here. Yeah.
So maybe Gilda has come through on the picture. And, if I'm smart, if I'm trying to woo you as a client, I write down Gilda Radner is the name of her dog, and I figure out some time in the future to maybe use that. Or you happen to mention that you have kids, or that you happen to mention that you wrote a couple of novels a number of years ago. Wait a minute, that one's actually true.
That is true.
You write that down, and that becomes just personalized information that you can bring into conversation. I had a great example the other day. I was networking with somebody, met him for the first time. Soon as he came up on screen, I saw that he had a framed Michael Jordan jersey behind him. Oh. Now, I'm a Chicagoan, and I also have a Michael Jordan story in which I delivered a pizza to him when I was a teenager. So immediately got to segue into that story, warm up the conversation, just because I noticed what was in his background. And so we can do this virtually too. And I think it's a great reminder to us, whether we're in virtual or in the real world, that getting to know that other party and establishing a relationship, that allows us to be more personalized. And I think in a non-creepy manner.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. And you're right. You made a great point too about those kind of indirect mentions, but I'll tell you, like, the bulk of the work that we're doing, if you're not listening as an organization to those indirect mentions, you're missing out. Because I don't think consumers talk as formally as we think on social, right? So I would say, the majority of our programs, it's as high as 80% of our engagements are with those indirect mentions. But again, you got to add context to it. Don't barge into the conversation. Take a moment, take a beat, read the room, just like you would at, a face-to-face scenario, and then find a way to make a connection that seems genuine as much as possible, just by picking up sort of those clues like you talked about. It's great advice.
Yeah, it's funny because we just put up a question from Brian Kramer, and Brian, of course, is known for his H to H theory of things being human to human, not B2B or not B2C. And to me, the pandemic has just exacerbated that. We're in so much more need for human connection than even ever before because we were lacking it for so long. Mm-hmm. And I think what companies sometimes miss is that there is a desire for human connection with the companies that we do business with as well. That might be having a favorite customer service agent. That might be, your Starbucks barista that always knows your order. Whatever it is, there's that human connection that's different from the brand connection. And I think we can establish that even in social media with the right kind of listening and the genuine engagement, not the jumping in to sell me something. One example, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I have always advised companies against jumping into conversations about their competition, because to me, that feels a little like, if I'm Burger King and somebody's having a problem with McDonald's and I hop in and say, well, hey, come and have our Whopper instead. I don't know. That doesn't feel good to me. It feels a little weird. I don't know if you've experienced something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. So I'm with you, and then I also would put a little asterisk next to that and say, here's the exception to the rule. Anytime that we see an opportunity where a consumer is sort of weighing their options, and it could be against a competitor of a brand partner of ours, we may chime in, but we never degrade the competitor. That's not what we're there for. And that wouldn't fit with the brand, right? So you have to know your brand. Now, some of this ribbing that we see between brands, it's very, very common in the telecommunications space. Not only do you see these providers going after each other, but their CEOs are going after each other, on social. I guess that's sort of expected there. But like, if I think, in my past life, when I was agency side, I worked with a lot of big brands, including Nike, and they would never kind of chime in on an Adidas conversation or Under Armour or vice versa. So I think it's understanding who your brand is. We all name check Wendy's a lot in social because they're always roasting people. That's right for Wendy's. It's not right for every other brand. So don't copy other people. Know who you are and how to show up authentically in those conversations.
Totally right. And I often cite Wendy's too and say, hey, what they do is great, but chances are you don't work for Wendy's and you don't work for a company like Wendy's. And so they do what is right for them, and it works really well for their brand, but it doesn't work for everybody. The other thing I would say, at least I've observed in my personal career, the 3 Fortune 300 companies that I worked for, 2 of them were follower brands and 1 of them was a leader brand. So I worked for Discover, which is the 4th largest credit card company, and Humana, which is the, 3rd or 4th largest insurance company. And then I worked for the big gorilla, McDonald's. And there is a difference. The theory at McDonald's was, we don't play that stuff because we're sitting up here and all of these ankle biters, that's their job, is to do that. Right. And so Wendy's plays it and Burger King plays it and Taco Bell plays it, but that's not us. Whereas a follower brand like a Discover, Humana, or some of the others we've mentioned, there's a little bit less to lose. And so you've got the opportunity to maybe have a little bit of fun in a good natured way with the larger competitor. And so I don't mind that. Where I was saying was more like, I think you could develop a strategy where you look for complaints about the competition and then you jump in and say, well, since you're having problems over there, come to us instead. And to me, that just feels a little smarmy. That's all.
For sure.
But I think, but people do it. So let's jump for a minute, because I did mention that you are an author, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what you've written in the past. And then since I haven't talked to you in a while, I'm interested to know, have you been doing any writing lately?
Yeah, absolutely. So this will probably not seem very connected to this world of customer experience, but I would argue that the connection is storytelling, which is, my heart and soul. I wrote my first book when I was 4. It was called The Circus Book, print run, 1 copy. I still have it, by the way. It's delightful and frightening at the same time, because I also did illustrations, but I've been writing since I was very young.
I have one from, I think, 7th grade called Joe's Balloon.
Oh, we should go together. We should release them. We can go on tour. That'd be great. Because there's a clown holding like a balloon. It's very scary. But I love reading and I love writing. And I've written 2 fiction novels, both published with Simon & Schuster. The first one's called Grosse Pointe Girl, Tales from a Suburban Adolescence. I grew up in Grosse Pointe, so that's a little bit more ripped from the headlines, if you will. I've watched a lot of Law and Order. And then the second one was called The Girl I Wanted to Be. That was definitely much more fictionalized. You asked what I've been writing lately. Well, I finally conquered a lifelong dream of mine to do a screenplay. So I adapted my second novel, The Girl I Wanted to Be, into a screenplay, spent most of 2019 working on that. I've renamed it The Mistakes We Made, and I'm currently in the process of shopping that around right now. So
awesome. That's amazing.
Thanks.
That is super cool. I love it. When you mentioned the connection to customer experience, I was thinking of, have you ever met Allie Pleiter before? Have we talked about it? So I should introduce you to Allie, who is now the president of the National Speakers Association Illinois chapter, is a romance novelist. And we featured her on my podcast Experience This because of all of the research that she does on her fictional characters. And so she had like a cowboy character in one of her romance novels. And so she spent time with cowboys and, and watched a bull run and watched all this stuff to kind of really get in. She's ridden in rodeos. She's participated on a trapeze act in the circus. Like, she's gone and done all of this stuff so that she can write about it more realistically with these fictional characters, which I think is essentially the same thing as getting in the shoes of your customer and really understanding how they're using your company, your brand, your product, the issues that they have, the barriers that they face, the joys that they have, and really understanding it so much that you could write about it and do something about it. So it's really cool. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's understanding human behavior, right? It's understanding, again, it's relationships. So I'm writing about relationships between people and dynamics and family, but you have a relationship as a company, as a brand with your customer. And it's not just when things go wrong, as I mentioned, it's throughout. There's going to be ups and downs, and it's how you show up along the way. So that I really do think that there's a parallel there for sure. And kind of that, I love research and analytics and studying human behavior. And I certainly see that play into my fiction work as well.
Yeah. It's like my majors in college were psychology and communications, which basically meant I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I got into marketing and I realized that actually is psychology and communications.
Got it. Yeah, exactly.
It all kind of comes around. So what is, as we're coming up on time here, what's next for you and for Clearlink and Sykes? And, what are you looking, as you look forward to the rest of 2021 and the world opening back up again, what are you guys preparing for? What do you see as either trends that are sticking around from the pandemic, or going back to certain things that we used to do that we weren't, or maybe some new things that have developed?
Yeah, great question. So we play in a lot of different industries and verticals. We have a lot of roots in things like technology, telecommunications, fintech, financial services, healthcare, CPG, apparel. So I would say, one thing we saw over the last year was we saw companies that really struggled. We saw a lot of companies that had to pivot. We saw a lot of companies that were not only surviving, but thriving. And I felt like there were things that fell into kind of two categories, either kind of a comfort or a critical need, and some were both. And there's a couple takeaways that we have moving forward. One is going back to that, the importance of being there for every stage of the journey. That's just been dialed up. So what I'm seeing now in my conversations with our current and potential brand partners is this desire to be there in social at every stage of the journey. And, we certainly have expertise in that space. I think the other thing that we saw happening before the pandemic was this growing need for purpose and transparency within an organization. Who you are as a company is just as important as what you do and how much you sell it for, right? So today's consumer is very conscious. And I think as we work with our partners, it's how do you bring that forward in an authentic way at these connections and touch points. And the third part, of course, is, I would say, digital transformation, which is a term, to be honest with you, I think it's thrown around and misused and just kind of plugged into places that makes no sense. But really what it means is looking at your whole business organization and how can you take things that might have been really kind of hand done before, add some automation in there in an intelligent way. So, your workforce can be paying attention to the things that are more nuanced and require more kind of human attention to it. And let's use that kind of intelligent automation to help us out behind the scenes. So those are just kind of a couple of the things at the forefront of where we are today.
That's great. And I think just to circle back to where we started here, that digital transformation also applies to companies that aren't digital. So if you are, let's say, a contractor that works on, carpet or flooring or walls in people's homes, you got to remember that still they're going to find you through a Google search or through a referral from a friend. And generally that's going to come through some digital channel. So even though your work may be 100% in the real world, that doesn't mean that you get an excuse to not be digital, because ultimately, if you want people to find you and you want people to research and feel comfortable about doing business with you, there is going to be a digital component. I can't think of almost any business that shouldn't have some digital component. And yet for a lot of people, it's still an afterthought. So Great stuff. Love talking to you. Obviously, you and I could talk for hours, and hopefully we'll get that chance soon in an upcoming event or somewhere in person. But thank you so much for being here. Sarah Grace, how can people contact you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, well, you can get to me through sarahgraciously.com. That's my website. Obviously, I'm available through Sykes and Clearlink as well. Follow me on Twitter. It's Sarah Graciously. I used to be Sarah Disgraced, but I rebranded a couple years ago to be less teen angsty and more yes and everything. So
I remember that rebrand. That was great.
Yeah. And I got to give my colleague Bo Young a little shout out for that. That was his suggestion. But please connect with me on LinkedIn too. That's probably the best place to start. So reach out. I'd love to talk about anything that's related to customer experience, purpose-driven organizations for sure. Social, of course, is one of my loves as well, and storytelling and strategy. And I'm so glad to be here to talk to you.
Awesome. Yeah. And your content is great. I love following you on those channels and engaging with you. So thanks again for your time. Lovely to see you as always. And we will talk again soon. And thank you for being here today. I want to quickly introduce next week's guest. Super excited. The one, the only, Ann Handley. She is the founder and CEO of Marketing Profs, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and possibly most importantly, and I'm sure the thing that she is celebrating more than any of those accomplishments, is she wrote the foreword to my new book, The Experience Maker: How to Create Remarkable Experiences That Your Customers Can't Wait to Share. And when I tell you she wrote the foreword, wow, did she impress on the foreword. She is a fantastic writer. She's actually written about writing. One of her most well-known books is called Everyone Writes, or maybe it's Everybody Writes. I apologize, Ann. But terrific forward. I was super excited when I read it and really excited to talk to Ann next week. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week at the regular time, which is Thursdays at noon Eastern. We'll be back on schedule next week. Thank you again. Have a terrific weekend. This is Dan Gingiss for The Experience Maker.